The first major crack in the 2026 World Cup did not come from a referee decision. It did not come from a controversial goal. It did not come from a scandalous press conference. It came from a scoreboard. Spain, 0. Cape Verde, 0. On paper, that result should not exist. Spain arrived at this tournament as reigning European champions, one of the deepest squads in world football, a team packed with players from the biggest clubs on the planet. Cape Verde arrived as a nation of roughly 560,000 people appearing in only their second World Cup. The obvious story was that football had produced another miracle. The less obvious story was much more uncomfortable, because by June 15th, only 5 days into the tournament, signs were already emerging that something much bigger was happening beneath the surface. Not one controversy, not one disagreement, not one isolated complaint, 5 separate acts of resistance, 5 different confrontations, 5 different groups pushing back against the same machine. And the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to believe these events are unrelated, because the first revolt had already happened before Spain and Cape Verde ever walked onto the field. It happened inside MetLife Stadium. Brazil against Morocco, one of the most anticipated matches of the opening round. Morocco struck first through Ismail Saibari, stunning the Brazilians. Then came the response. Vinícius Júnior cut in from the left side and buried the equalizer past Yassine Bounou. Brazil escaped with a 1-1 draw. The football itself was dramatic, but what happened afterward drew even more attention. Under FIFA's tournament regulations, players and coaches are expected to participate in mandatory media obligations. Broadcasters pay enormous sums for access. The interviews are part of the product. Then Vinícius refused. Not delayed, not postponed, refused. When reporters warned that financial penalties could follow, the response reportedly stunned people around the stadium. The message was simple: fine us, we don't care, we will pay, but we are not participating. At first glance, it sounded like a superstar having a bad day, but that explanation quickly started falling apart, because the resistance wasn't really about interviews. The interview was just the visible part. The real argument was happening somewhere else entirely, inside the tournament's cooling break policy. Officially, FIFA introduced mandatory cooling breaks as a player welfare measure, a health and safety initiative designed to protect athletes from extreme temperatures. Sounds reasonable, until players started asking questions. Before the tournament, dozens of elite professionals reportedly supported demands for longer recovery breaks and independent monitoring of heat conditions inside stadiums. Their argument was straightforward: if temperatures become dangerous, recovery periods should be determined by science, not television schedules. The demand was for longer breaks, independent oversight, more protection. Instead, the existing structure remained largely unchanged, and critics immediately noticed something uncomfortable. The cooling breaks happened to fit perfectly into commercial broadcast windows. 3 minutes, not 6, not whatever medical experts might eventually recommend. 3, long enough for advertisements, short enough to preserve television inventory. That distinction became important, because suddenly Vinícius refusing to cooperate with the media machine looked less like rebellion and more like a statement. A small one, but a statement. And it was only the beginning, because while Brazil's dispute focused on commercial obligations, another conflict was emerging from geography itself. The expanded 48-team World Cup was marketed as a celebration of inclusion, more nations, more opportunities, more stories. But every expansion creates new pressures. And those pressures have to go somewhere. In this case, they landed directly on the players. This tournament stretches across 3 countries: the United States, Canada, Mexico, 16 host cities, multiple time zones, massive travel distances, constant movement, constant adjustment, constant disruption. The result is something football has never experienced at this scale: a World Cup that sometimes feels less like a tournament and more like a continent-wide endurance test. And not every nation enters that test equally prepared. The biggest federations have resources, private logistics, specialized recovery teams, advanced planning. The smaller federations do not. That is where Spain versus Cape Verde starts looking different. The draw suddenly becomes more than an upset, because the conditions surrounding the match become impossible to ignore. Teams are being moved enormous distances. Training environments keep changing. Recovery schedules keep changing. Sleep schedules keep changing. Everything keeps changing, and for nations operating with fewer resources, every additional complication matters. A lot. Some federations ended up based in locations far removed from the glamorous image usually associated with a World Cup. Iraq found itself operating from rural West Virginia. Spain was reportedly based at a boarding school facility in Tennessee. The distances involved are staggering. The logistics are relentless, and every mile creates another opportunity for fatigue, another opportunity for mistakes, another opportunity for performance levels to drop, which raises an uncomfortable question. If the tournament structure itself is influencing outcomes, how many surprises are really surprises? And if that's true, who benefits from pretending otherwise? The answers become even more complicated when you move beyond logistics and into politics, because that is where the third revolt begins, and this is where the story becomes much harder for FIFA to explain. Iran entered the tournament facing challenges that had nothing to do with football, nothing to do with tactics, nothing to do with player quality. Before their opening match, reports emerged that multiple senior Iranian football officials had been unable to enter the United States. Administrative leadership was suddenly missing. Federation representatives were absent. Key support figures were unavailable. Then came another problem: supporters. Questions emerged surrounding ticket access and fan presence. The atmosphere around the team became increasingly uncertain, increasingly isolated, increasingly complicated, and then came the logistical reality that shocked many observers. Iran's operational setup reportedly required the squad to stay in Mexico and cross an international border for match commitments. Think about that for a moment. Most World Cup teams worry about training schedules, recovery plans, opposition analysis. Iran was dealing with international border logistics during a major tournament. Every additional procedure creates friction. Every additional checkpoint creates stress. Every additional complication consumes energy that should be going toward football. Instead, it was being spent navigating circumstances most competitors never had to face. And yet, FIFA's marketing message remained unchanged. Unity, global inclusion, the world coming together, a celebration of football without borders. The contrast was impossible to miss. The branding promised one reality. The operational reality looked very different, and that contradiction keeps appearing again and again and again, because by this stage, the pattern becomes difficult to dismiss. A superstar refusing media obligations, players challenging welfare policies, smaller nations battling exhausting travel demands, teams confronting logistical inequalities, a major national side operating under extraordinary geopolitical constraints. Different stories, same direction, pushback, resistance, frustration, questions, lots of questions. FIFA's defenders point out something important, and to be fair, they have a case. The expanded World Cup has created opportunities that never existed before. More nations are participating, more fans are engaged, more countries are experiencing the sport's biggest stage. That matters. It genuinely does. Qatar earned their first World Cup point. Scotland celebrated a victory decades in the making. Cape Verde stood toe-to-toe with European champions. Those moments are real. Those moments are beautiful. Those moments are exactly what expansion was supposed to create. But here's the problem. The success stories don't automatically erase the underlying concerns. In fact, they may make those concerns more visible, because the better the football becomes, the more people start asking whether the structure around it is keeping pace. Whether player welfare is truly the priority, whether competitive conditions are genuinely equal, whether commercial interests are becoming too powerful, whether growth is being managed responsibly, or whether the tournament is simply becoming too large for its own architecture. That is the question hanging over this World Cup. Not whether the football is entertaining, it clearly is. Not whether new nations belong on this stage. Many have already proven they do. The real question is whether the people running the competition can keep expanding the spectacle without eventually breaking the systems underneath it. Because 5 days into the tournament, 5 different revolts had already emerged. Some loud, some quiet, some political, some physical, some commercial, some logistical, but all of them pointed toward the same uncomfortable possibility, that beneath the celebration, beneath the branding, beneath the record audiences and billion-dollar broadcasts, a growing number of players and teams are starting to push back against the way modern football's biggest event is being built. And if that's happening now, only 5 days into the tournament, what happens if the pressure keeps growing? Are we witnessing the beginning of a genuine challenge to the way global football is governed? Or are these simply the first signs of friction inside a machine that has become so large, so profitable, and so powerful that it no longer feels obligated to listen?